The retirement party for Dad was held at Romano's, the same restaurant where our family had celebrated every major milestone for the past 20 years. 3 generations of Williamson success stories had been toasted in this private dining room, and tonight was supposed to be Dad's triumphant farewell after 35 years of building Williamson Manufacturing into a regional powerhouse. The entire extended family was there: aunts, uncles, cousins, longtime family friends, and several employees from the company. Dad sat at the head of the table, looking relaxed and happy for the first time in months. At 67, he'd more than earned his retirement. My brother Derek sat to Dad's right, practically glowing with anticipation. At 34, Derek had been groomed for this moment his entire life. He joined the company straight out of college, worked his way up through various departments, and spent the last 5 years as Dad's right-hand man in preparation for this succession. I sat toward the middle of the table, quietly nursing a glass of wine and listening to the speeches about Dad's legacy and the bright future of Williamson Manufacturing under new leadership. "Richard Williamson built something extraordinary," Uncle Tom was saying, raising his glass. "A company that employs over 200 people, serves clients across 4 states, and has been profitable for 3 decades running." Everyone applauded. Dad smiled and nodded graciously. "And now," Uncle Tom continued, "he's passing that legacy to the next generation. Derek has big shoes to fill, but he's been trained by the best." More applause. Derek's chest puffed with pride. Cousin Lisa stood up next. "I want to say how proud we all are of what Uncle Richard has built. Williamson Manufacturing has been the foundation of our family's success for decades." She wasn't wrong. Dad's company manufactured industrial equipment, conveyor systems, hydraulic lifts, custom machinery for factories and warehouses. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, profitable, and had provided comfortable lives for everyone in our family. "Derek," Lisa continued, "we're so excited to see where you take the company next. You've been preparing for this your whole life." Derek stood up, unable to contain his excitement any longer. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This is definitely the most important moment of my professional life." He looked around the room with confidence, every inch the successful businessman in his expensive suit and perfectly styled hair. "Dad has built something incredible," Derek continued, "and I want you all to know that I don't take the responsibility lightly. Williamson Manufacturing is going to continue growing under my leadership." He paused for dramatic effect. "In fact, I've already been working on some exciting expansion plans. We're going to modernize our equipment, expand into new markets, and double our workforce within 3 years." The room buzzed with impressed murmurs. Derek's wife Jennifer beamed at him from across the table. "The company is mine now," Derek declared, his voice carrying across the entire restaurant. "Time for real leadership." The proclamation was met with enthusiastic applause. Several people raised their glasses in toasts to Derek's future success. I took a sip of my wine and reached into my briefcase for a manila folder I'd been carrying all evening. "Derek," I said quietly, "before you finalize those expansion plans, there's something you should probably know." Derek looked at me with mild irritation. Throughout his speech, I'd been the only family member who hadn't applauded or offered congratulations. In Derek's mind, I was probably just being difficult as usual. "What's that, little sister?" he asked with condescending patience. I quietly placed a folder on the table in front of him. "Actually, Phoenix Holdings acquired everything last month." The champagne glasses shattered when Derek grabbed the folder and saw the acquisition documents. Actually, only Derek's glass shattered. He dropped it in shock when he read the first page of the legal documents, but the sound of crystal hitting the hardwood floor was so sharp that the entire room fell silent. "What is this?" Derek demanded, his voice rising. "Those are the acquisition papers," I said calmly. "Phoenix Holdings purchased 100% of Williamson Manufacturing on October 15th. The transaction closed 3 weeks ago." Derek was frantically flipping through pages of legal documents, his face getting redder with each one. "This is impossible. Dad never mentioned selling the company." "Because Dad didn't sell the company," I said. "I bought it." The silence that followed was absolute. 30 people stared at me like I'd just announced I was from Mars. Dad was the first to find his voice. "Emma, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I purchased Williamson Manufacturing through my holding company last month," I said simply. Phoenix Holdings now owns 100% of the business, all assets and all operations. Derek was still staring at the documents. Phoenix Holdings, that's you? That's one of my companies, yes. One of your companies? Derek's voice cracked. Emma, you work in marketing for some tech startup. How could you possibly have companies? I had to smile at that description of my career. Derek, I don't work in marketing for a tech startup. I run my own investment firm. Phoenix Holdings is my primary acquisition vehicle. Uncle Tom leaned forward. Emma, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I said, pulling out my phone and showing them the Phoenix Holdings website. I've been acquiring small to medium manufacturing companies for the past 6 years. Williamson Manufacturing was my 17th acquisition. Dad took my phone and stared at the screen. The website was professional, comprehensive, and clearly showed me as the founder and CEO of Phoenix Holdings. Emma, Dad said slowly, this says Phoenix Holdings has acquired over $300 million in assets. $340 million as of last quarter, I corrected. Though that number fluctuates based on market valuations. Derek found his voice again. This is insane. Emma, you can't just buy Dad's company without telling anyone. I didn't buy it without telling anyone, I pointed out. I bought it without telling you. What's the difference? The difference is that Dad knew exactly what was happening. We've been negotiating this acquisition for 4 months. All eyes turned to Dad, who looked suddenly uncomfortable. Richard. Mom's voice was sharp. Is this true? Dad nodded slowly. Emma approached me in June about purchasing the company. We've been working out the details ever since. You knew about this? Derek's voice was getting higher. You knew Emma was buying the company and you didn't tell me? I told you I was exploring succession options, Dad said defensively. I never said those options only included you. Derek looked like he'd been physically slapped. But we've been planning my takeover for years. You've been training me to run the company. I've been training you to run a company, Dad corrected. I never guaranteed it would be this company. The distinction was apparently lost on Derek, who was now rifling through the acquisition documents with increasing panic. This says the purchase price was $4.2 million, he read aloud. Emma paid $4.2 million for the company? Cash purchase, I confirmed. No financing, no contingencies. We closed 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Jennifer, Derek's wife, found her voice. Emma, where did you get $4.2 million? From my investment portfolio, I said. It's been a good year for my holdings. Dad was still looking at my phone, scrolling through the Phoenix Holdings website. Emma, this says you employ over 60 people across your various companies. 63 as of last month, I said. We just hired a new acquisitions team. Derek was reading more of the documents. It says here that all current employees will retain their positions and benefits. What does that mean for me? It means you'll continue working as operations manager, assuming you want to stay with the company. Operations manager? Derek's voice rose again. I was supposed to be the CEO. Derek, I said gently, you were never going to be CEO of Williamson Manufacturing. Dad was looking for an exit strategy, not a succession plan. That's not true. Derek turned to Dad. Tell her that's not true. Dad looked uncomfortable. Derek, we've talked about this. The manufacturing industry is changing rapidly. The company needs significant capital investment to stay competitive. I could have gotten financing. With what collateral? I asked. Derek, you have about $40,000 in savings and a mortgage on your house. You couldn't have raised the capital needed for the equipment upgrades alone, let alone the expansion plans you were just describing. Derek stared at me. How do you know how much money I have? Because I've been analyzing the financials of everyone involved in this transaction for months, I said. Due diligence is a critical part of any acquisition. Uncle Tom was reading over Derek's shoulder. Emma, this document says Phoenix Holdings plans to invest an additional $2.8 million in equipment upgrades and facility expansion. That's correct. The manufacturing industry is becoming increasingly automated. We need new equipment to stay competitive. You have $2.8 million for upgrades? Mom asked weakly. I have a line of credit for operational improvements across my portfolio, I explained. Williamson Manufacturing will benefit from economy of scale purchasing and shared technology resources. Derek was still processing. You're saying you bought Dad's company as part of some kind of business empire? I'm saying I bought a profitable manufacturing company that fits well with my existing holdings, I corrected. The fact that it's Dad's company was actually a complicating factor, not a motivating one. What do you mean? Dad asked. I mean, I had to be extra careful about the valuation and terms to make sure no one could claim I was getting a family discount, I explained. I actually paid slightly above market value to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Derek was reading the financial summary. You paid $4.2 million for a company that generated $800,000 in profit last year? I paid $4.2 million for a company with excellent cash flow, strong client relationships, and significant growth potential in a stable industry, I said. Plus I'm acquiring 35 years of Dad's expertise as a consulting arrangement. Consulting arrangement? Dad looked surprised. It's in the paperwork. I'd like you to stay on as a strategic advisor for the first 2 years of the transition. Part-time, flexible schedule, excellent compensation. I handed Dad a separate document. This outlines the consulting agreement. Essentially, you'd be available to help with major decisions and client relationships while I handle the day-to-day operations. Dad read through the consulting offer, his eyebrows rising. Emma, this is a very generous arrangement. It's a smart business decision. Your relationships and expertise are valuable assets. Derek was staring at both of us. So Dad gets to stay involved, I get demoted to operations manager, and Emma becomes the CEO of a company she's never worked for? Derek, I said patiently, I've been analyzing this company for months. I understand the operations, the client base, the market dynamics, and the growth opportunities better than you think. But you've never actually worked here. No, but I've successfully acquired and managed 16 other companies in related industries. I understand manufacturing operations, supply chain management, and industrial client relationships. Jennifer was looking at the documents over Derek's shoulder. What about the expansion plans Derek mentioned? The doubling of the workforce. Those plans are financially unrealistic given current market conditions, I said. However, the equipment upgrades and facility improvements I'm planning will allow us to increase capacity by about 30% within 18 months. 30%? Derek looked confused. I was planning to double capacity. With what funding? Derek, you were talking about expansion plans without any realistic financing strategy. Dad was nodding slowly. Emma's right. The plans you outlined tonight would have required capital we don't have. But I could have figured it out. Derek protested. Derek, I said gently, in the 4 months that Dad and I were negotiating this acquisition, you never once asked about the company's long-term financial needs or succession planning. You assumed you would inherit the business, but you never developed a realistic plan for running it. The criticism was gentle but pointed and clearly hit home. Uncle Tom looked at me with new respect. Emma, I had no idea you were involved in business acquisitions. The family always thought you worked in marketing. I did work in marketing, I said, for about 18 months after college. Then I started my own consulting firm, which evolved into an investment company, which became Phoenix Holdings. How long have you been acquiring companies? Cousin Lisa asked. 6 years. I started small, buying struggling businesses, improving their operations and either keeping them as portfolio companies or selling them at a profit. Mom was still trying to process everything. Emma, why didn't you ever tell us about your success? It was a question I'd been expecting. Because every time I tried to talk about my work, someone would change the subject or suggest I should get a real job, with benefits. Derek winced at that. He'd made the real job suggestion multiple times over the years. Plus, I continued, I wanted to see if I could succeed without relying on family connections or name recognition. And you succeeded, Dad said, pride evident in his voice. I did well, I said modestly. Derek was still staring at the acquisition documents. Emma, what happens to me now? Am I fired? Derek, you're one of the most knowledgeable people about Williamson Manufacturing's operations. Why would I fire you? Because I've been acting like I was going to inherit the company you just bought? Because you didn't know I was going to buy it, I pointed out. Your assumption about inheritance was reasonable given the information you had. Derek looked relieved but still confused. So I keep my job? You keep your job with a promotion to senior operations manager and a significant salary increase, I said, handing him another document. Phoenix Holdings values experienced management. Derek read the salary offer and his eyes widened. This is a lot more than I was making before. It's competitive with industry standards for your level of experience and responsibility. Jennifer leaned over to see the number and made a small gasping sound. Emma, Dad said, I need to ask you something. Of course. Was buying my company primarily a business decision or a family decision? It was a thoughtful question and one I'd wrestled with throughout the acquisition process. It was primarily a business decision, I said honestly. Williamson Manufacturing is profitable, well-managed, and operates in a stable industry. It fit perfectly with my investment criteria. And secondarily, I wanted to make sure the company you built continued to thrive and that the employees who depend on it had job security. Dad smiled at that. That's exactly the answer I was hoping for. Derek was reading through more of the paperwork. Emma, this says you're planning to maintain the Williamson Manufacturing name and branding. Of course. The Williamson name has 35 years of reputation and client relationships. Why would I change that? Even though you own it now? Derek, I own 16 companies. Most of them kept their original names because that's what their clients and communities know them as. Uncle Tom was still reading the Phoenix Holdings website on my phone. Emma, this is incredible. You own companies in manufacturing, logistics, technology services. I focus on businesses with strong fundamentals that can benefit from additional capital and operational expertise, I explained. And they're all profitable? All 17 companies in my portfolio are profitable, yes. Some more than others, but none are losing money. Mom reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Sweetheart, I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. And I'm sorry we didn't understand what you were building. Thank you, Mom. Derek closed the documents and looked at me with something that might have been respect. Emma, I owe you an apology. For what? For assuming you didn't understand business just because you didn't work in the family company. For not taking your career seriously. For thinking I was entitled to inherit something you were qualified to buy. It was a more mature response than I'd expected from Derek. Derek, you are qualified to run operations, I said. You know this business inside and out. I'm hoping you'll help me understand the nuances that aren't obvious from financial statements. You really want me to stay? I really want you to stay. Phoenix Holdings succeeds when we retain experienced management and institutional knowledge. Jennifer looked relieved. What about the expansion plans Derek mentioned? Will there be opportunities for growth? Absolutely. The equipment upgrades alone will create several new positions. Plus, I'm exploring opportunities to expand into related product lines. Related how? Derek asked. Automation systems, robotics integration, smart manufacturing technologies. Industries that complement our existing capabilities but offer higher margins. Derek's eyes lit up. You're talking about moving upmarket. Exactly. Instead of just building conveyor systems, we could be designing integrated automation solutions. That would require significant technical expertise, Derek said thoughtfully. Which is why I'm planning to hire additional engineers and invest in employee training programs. Dad was listening to this exchange with obvious satisfaction. You two are going to work well together. As the evening wound down, family members approached me individually to congratulate me on my success and ask questions about my business. The shock of the acquisition announcement had given way to curiosity and pride. Derek stayed after everyone else had left, nursing a cup of coffee while I finished explaining the transition timeline. Emma, he said, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Why didn't you just start your own manufacturing company instead of buying Dad's? It was a good question. Because starting from scratch would have meant competing with Dad's company, which didn't make sense for anyone. Acquiring Williamson Manufacturing allows me to build on existing success instead of starting over. And it keeps the family business in the family. It does that too. Derek smiled for the first time all evening. I think I'm actually excited about this. Working with someone who understands growth strategies and has access to capital. It could be really good for the company. I think so too. Plus, Derek added, it's kind of cool having a sister who's some kind of business acquisition genius. I laughed. I'm not a genius. I just pay attention to opportunities and have access to capital. How much capital are we talking about? I mean, if you don't mind me asking. I considered how much to share. Phoenix Holdings has access to about $40 million in liquid assets for acquisitions and improvements. Derek whistled softly. $40 million. It's not all my money, I clarified. Some of it is investor capital, lines of credit, and retained earnings from other companies. Still, that's serious money. It's enough to do serious business development. Derek stood up to leave. Emma, thank you for keeping me on. I know I didn't handle the announcement very gracefully. You handled it better than most people would have, I said honestly. Finding out your career expectations just changed dramatically isn't easy. No, but finding out your little sister is more successful than you ever imagined. That's actually pretty awesome. 6 months later, Williamson Manufacturing had completed its first phase of equipment upgrades and was already seeing improved efficiency and higher margin contracts. Derek had embraced his role as senior operations manager and was spearheading the expansion into automation systems. Dad was enjoying his part-time consulting role, which allowed him to stay connected to the business without the daily stress of running it. Mom had started volunteering with a business mentorship program for young entrepreneurs, inspired by my success story. And I had added a profitable, well-managed manufacturing company to my portfolio while keeping the family business in the family, just not in the way anyone had expected. Sometimes the best succession plan is the one nobody sees coming, especially when it comes from the family member everyone underestimated. Derek's expansion dreams had become reality, just with better financing and more realistic timelines. Dad's legacy was secure and growing. And I'd proven that sometimes the most successful acquisition is the one that benefits everyone involved. The company was still called Williamson Manufacturing, but now it was powered by Phoenix Holdings' resources and vision for the future. Derek had gotten his promotion and growth opportunities. Dad had gotten his retirement with continued involvement. And I had gotten exactly what I'd been looking for, a profitable addition to my portfolio that honored the past while building toward the future. Sometimes the best way to preserve a family legacy is to buy it, improve it, and let it soar.